Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we start a new theme month we're calling Childhood Nightmares. We're going to look back at a number of films, and maybe not just movies, that have inspired childhood nightmares in both Travis and I personally and just in the pop culture in general. And we're starting with a movie this week called The Peanut Butter Solution. Before we do that, we posted our episode of More Currently Consuming for the month of July on our Patreon page at patreon.com/genrevision. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff, Travis, Danny, and I. And it also led to a debate that I hope could rage on through the Patreon comments. But you're going to have to listen to the Patreon episode to know what that was. So if that sounds interesting to you, patreon.com/genrevision. You can become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. And it gives you access to all of our bonus material. Go do that because it was a really fun episode. Also, real quick, if you love what we're doing here with Genre Vision, please go to the Apple Podcast Store, rate and review the show. It is the best marketing that we can afford right now. It really, really helps us out. It helps us climb the rankings, which means we get in front of more eyeballs and inside of more ears. If you do leave a written review on the Apple Podcast Store, we will feature it here on the show. So the Peanut Butter Solution is kicking off Childhood Nightmares Month, and we picked a pretty good movie to kick off the month in terms of being a nightmare, because this film literally feels like watching somebody else's nightmare.
Yeah, at times it is structurally kind of like phantasmagoric, meaning it switches in ways and sort of like will turn narrative corners that are completely unpredictable if you've never seen it or if you've never read a synopsis. But the way it sort of abandons ideas and sort of eschews traditional narrative structures is so impressive that it has sort of lasted as a cult, not classic, but a cult movie, particularly for millennials like you and me. This came out in 1985 in its native Canada. And it was part of a series of films made by this certain production company. Gosh, what do they call these? Movies for All or something like that?
Yeah, Tales for All. This was produced by the company Les Productions Les Fêtes.
Yeah. This
is apparently a series that is run from 1971 all the way up until 2014 as of now. This is obviously a line of family films that include such great titles as The Dog Who Stopped the War, The Christmas Martian, and Tommy Tricker and the Stamp Traveler, which I said sounds like some 60s hippie band.
These are all Key and Peele football names.
Right, exactly. Yes, things like The Clean Machine.
The Christmas Martian, Florida Atlantic University.
Oh, one of these is called The Hidden Fortress. What? Yeah, shame on them. Well, so anyways, so it was part of the series. So it opens with these illustrated title cards that show what's going to happen in the movie. Then the movie starts. And I think you described it very well in terms of when I say it's like a literal nightmare, I mean that the tone, the mood, the rhythm of everything feels like a dream. And we get introduced to our main character, who is, well, he's the main character for a while.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like the film actually really picks one.
Yes, this is Michael. He and his sister Susie are living with their dad, Billy, played by Michael Hogan, who a lot of people might recognize from Battlestar Galactica. And apparently their mother is in Australia for some undetermined amount of time. I don't know exactly. I don't remember exactly why she's in Australia, but whatever.
I think it was a death in the family that she had to go attend to, something like that.
Okay.
But they all live in French Canada, and the immediate sort of sensation that you get is like, okay, this is all fairly mundane. There is sort of a weird rhythm to it. You meet Michael's best friend, who's this kid named Connie, which is short for Conrad, and his fashion choices are sort of immediately kind of odd for an 11-year-old kid. He's like very styling.
Yeah, he's wearing like a leather jacket and I can't remember the exact cap he has on, but
like
it's
a trilby or a pork pie hat, something like that.
yeah, and it's like, okay, choices, but this is the tippy tip of the iceberg of weirdness that is the peanut butter solution.
Yeah, the young sister Sue, in the absence of the mom, is taking on this weird role. Like, you get the sense that Sue is like a year older than Michael, maybe, and she's kind of like filling in the mom role in this weird way. She's like looking after him and performing all these sort of domestic duties. It's so odd.
It's very odd also from an acting perspective to ask a very young child actor to be like, well, play your version of what you think a mom is. It's like, it's so warped. Like these are all, there are so many bricks of decision that make up the odd wall that is the peanut butter solution. And one of those bricks is acting direction. In this particular instance, so you have Michael Hogan, who's a painter, who's apparently trying to sell paintings to a character known as the Rabbit that they keep referring to. Like, the Rabbit's going to be coming. I'm like, the Rabbit? What is this? Like, is this going to be an Alice in Wonderland riff or something? Like, what is fucking going on?
It increases like the Lynchian weirdness of this movie, where they're talking about, oh, the Rabbit is coming. Like, what the fuck are they talking about? Turns out the Rabbit is just this dude who's like a gallery owner, art dealer. And the dad's paintings are these very, at the same time, they're kind of fanciful, but they're kind of kitschy. He has this big sort of mural sized painting that he's painting for the family that has all the members of the family very happy and playing tennis with one another. But like, he has other paintings. I think it's like Well Dressed Bird, where it's like,
they're all bird themed.
It's a bird in a suit.
He looks like he's doing concept art for Duckman or something. Like, it's very weird, and he's not able to like sell anything. So there's like this painting thing established in the movie, which is gonna come up later, because the real kickoff to the movie is Michael and Connie, and I think a bunch of other kids are talking about earlier when Connie comes over that morning for breakfast. He's talking about like, oh yeah, there was a fire at this old house and there were people inside and they died. They got crisped up and stuff. It's like, oh, okay, well that's pretty horrifying for this seemingly inert family kids movie.
Yeah, keep in mind the score is doing the correct job of actually kind of supporting the weirdness and the horror of this. There is a scene like early on where it's pretty apparent that the movie's just like, yeah, demonize the homeless. Let me hit the accelerator pedal to the fucking metal on demonizing the homeless. Because like there's a scene where we see Connie walking by these two homeless people that he just calls winos. He's like trying to get away from the scary winos. And it ends up that Connie and Michael go to this burned up house, and they climb up a chute into, or Michael climbs up a chute into a second story window, and he goes inside and he sees something. There is this cut to this close up of him extraordinarily suddenly when he's really screaming his lungs out and all his hair is standing on it. It's a really strange and like shocking cut.
This is when the real nightmare feel of the movie hits first. Because there was already like a weird rhythm between the acting decisions, the direction to the actors and the edit and everything, the music. All of this is like, yeah, something's off. And I'm not saying off in a quality descriptor way. Like, no, something's like off.
From a technical standpoint, it's working as a movie. There's nothing about it from a technical standpoint that feels inept.
No, it's not a matter of ineptitude. It's a matter of like, there are specific decisions going on here, and they are conscious decisions.
Oh, yeah.
Like you say, this is not about ineptitude. There are conscious decisions being made here that are feeding into this, I think, a deliberate buildup of like, this is weird, right? Like, something weird's going on. Just tonally. And then when we get to this fright scene, because they keep calling this, whatever Michael saw, the fright. Like, it's like, he saw the fright. What's the fright? And this caused him to scream and have his hair stand on end. And eventually the next day, all of his hair has fallen out and he is bald. And he is told by a doctor that this is a condition called harem scarum.
The doctor goes on this extended explanation of like, okay, so here are my fingers on the desk and this is your hair grabbing on. And then you got scared and they all let go, as if that makes any more sense.
Understand this monologue is punctuated by goofy sound effects in which the doctor is wiggling his fingers. And it's like, I don't know, you're hearing like wood rattling or something, like somebody's knocking a wooden cowbell around.
It's Bones.
But so these are what I mean by, the bricks of decisions. Like, this is another little brick that you just put in. Like, it's like, what's going on with this? Because conceptually, story wise, I'm not off the rails with this. It's like, I told you, I was like, the story, the plot of the movie is like like having a Roald Dahl tale recounted to you by a drunk.
It does feel like that. And to make matters stranger, we do get a look at Michael and Connie's life at school. They go to this Canadian school with this very sort of demanding headmistress. She's constantly chastising kids in the hallway for, minor infractions. And they have an art class with this dude who calls himself the Signor, who's played by this French Canadian actor with a thick accent that is kind of Italian, but pretty damn French. He has this wild head of hair and this beard, and he has a dog, and he's trying to get the dog the model for the entire class. And his whole vibe is like, no imagination. You can't improvise. You have to draw this as realistically as possible. And he's walking around the room looking at kids' work. He's like, this is garbage. That's garbage. It's like, oh, this dude's a real fuck ass.
Okay. The Signor. So he is set up to be the villain of the piece eventually, where we get to. And this setup scene where he's tearing out, like criticizing all the kids' art, and he gets to Michael, and Michael has drawn the dog, but has put a bunch of flames behind him because he's thinking about the fire. This is before, I believe, he's been harem scarum.
Yeah, this is before the fright.
Yes. And so the Signor like tears up his picture, and it's like, okay, well, who is this guy? Don't worry, we'll get to it. Afterwards, Michael has the fright and his hair falls out, and he is very, very sad about being bald. And he is subjected to a couple ideas to help him out with his baldness. One of them being that they buy him a wig. In this moment, Susie and Michael's father grab him out of the blue and hold him down to try and put the wig on him.
Yeah, they forcefully wig this poor kid, and he's very resistant to the idea. I mean, he's already engaged in a lot of sulking and tantruming about his baldness. He doesn't want to go to school because he knows he's going to get made fun of. And it's like, I get this. Like, this is an understandable sort of childhood anxiety. He plays a very angsty drum solo in the basement because he's so angry. And they finally get him to wear this wig, and they glue it on. They're like, well, it's guaranteed for 30 days. Like, whatever factoid. It's just another, like you said, another weird little brick in this exceedingly weird wall of a film where it's just like, why would you put that little detail in as if it fucking matters at all?
Well, and I have to give credit to the actor Matthew McKay, who plays Michael, which I love that his IMDb profile picture is him bald in this movie, because they really shaved his head.
Yeah,
for the bald scenes. They could have cheaped out and put a bald cap on this kid, but this kid is method. Like, he believed that he was truly had lost his hair, because his acting is up there, but it's not. It feels earnest.
Yeah, he's not a bad kid actor at all. The performance he's putting in is just fine. I mean, he's given lots and lots of weird dialogue to say, but that's a problem across the board with all the characters.
Yes, nobody escapes the script of the peanut butter solution. So eventually, yeah, they glue this wig on top of him. He's like, hey, it sticks. It's fine. So then we have like a happy montage, and he's eventually playing soccer. And during this soccer game, there's one kid that Connie tells him, like, hey, watch out for him. He's really mean. He'll like kick you in the shins, and, he's just an asshole. So I believe some kind of altercation occurs. Like,
Michael scores a goal. Like, Michael's feeling great. He's running down the field. Bam! Scores a goal. And then the kid from the opposing team comes up and snatches his wig off. And they've put these dollops of glue under the wig that stretch out. It's really gross. There's like really stretchy gum kind of glue. It comes off in slow motion.
And the music is so horrible. Like, it's just so cruel. Like, it punctuates the cruelness of this moment. If that wasn't enough, they rip his wig off. And then all of a sudden, all the kids start laughing at him, of course. But then he tries to run away, and the entire soccer team chases him, pointing and laughing at him.
It's pure nightmare. Yeah,
it is. This is every stereotypical nightmare you had as a kid about, like showing up to school without your pants on, and it's like this is a dream. Like, this has to be a dream, right? Well, then the dream shit gets fucking legit weird.
So he's in bed at night and he's having I don't know, he's feeling scared. He gets a flashlight and goes downstairs, or he hears something. I forget exactly what it is, but he goes downstairs, and who are standing in the kitchen but the two winos standing there like ghosts in a Dickens novel, which is accurate because they soon say, yeah, we're ghosts.
So apparently Michael's house is being robbed by ghost hobos.
They're raiding the kitchen, just, like any ghost winos would.
Well, this is where we start getting more kind of nightmare logic to how it's like, he's like, well, you're slamming all this stuff. How can, you can't hear you. He's like, well, you can own the male ghost says, ghosts don't make any noise unless you see us. He's like, close your eyes. And he starts slamming a bunch of cabinets and there's no sound coming out. I'm like, okay, I guess that's a rule in this bizarre universe that this film exists in.
Ghosts don't make noise if you're not looking at them. Now, that could be an interesting detail if they decided to bring it up again later and have it be a thing. It's not a thing.
No, it's a thing for that one moment because it's fucking weird.
Yeah, exactly.
That's this whole movie in a nutshell.
This is one of my favorite lines in the movie. Michael is talking to the male wino who has this weird flock of seagulls hairstyle. And he's like, how did you become a rubby dub? I'm like, a rubby dub? And that's some sort of Quebecois slang that I had never heard before. I know what he means. How did you become a homeless person?
Yeah, or a is it like a drunkard or
tramp? What? I don't know.
Yeah, something to that effect.
How did you become a stereotype, sir? And a ghost?
Yeah. So yes, yeah. So eventually, it looks like these ghosts, the female ghost, she is an older lady. I said to you that it's these are basically the first two scary old people from the first two Home Alone movies.
Kind of. I mean, the homeless lady from Home Alone 2 kind of. Well, she looks very, very similar to the homeless wino woman in Peanut Butter Solution.
Yes, and eventually they have a recipe, or she has a recipe that will cure his baldness, and it's this crazy concoction that has stuff like 5 dead flies and all that kind of crazy stuff,
dirt, anchovies, and she's like, and 1 spoonful of peanut butter to get the thickness right, or something like that.
Yeah, to make it all stick together. And she says, but you can't use too much, don't use any more than that. And he's like, why not? And she's like, well, it's not for me to say. And then realizing that the title of the movie is a double entendre. It is the peanut butter solution, in that it is a solution that includes peanut butter, like a concoction. Mm-hmm. And a solution also it is the solution to Michael's problem of being bald. And I was like, oh my God. Brilliant.
Sure, but also the whole peanut butter thing eventually becomes just a small piece of what's going on in the movie.
Oh yes,
it's so odd. But after he gets this recipe for this peanut butter baldness cure, it's still the middle of the night, and he goes outside and he gets the dead flies from a spider's web. He gets the dirt that he needs. He gets the big jar of Skippy peanut butter, which was product placement for this movie, and he mixes it all up. And he's trying to paint it on his scalp, but it's too thin. So, of course, his child logic says, needs more peanut butter, even though the nightmare ghost winos told me expressly not to.
Yep.
So he thickens it up, he paints it on, and next morning he doesn't quite see the change he wants to see, but that changes rapidly.
Very rapidly. Eventually, he is in the dining room kitchen area, and Susie comes out and looks and is like, yeah, you got a little stubble on your hair. And he's like, hey, my head's growing back. In this sequence, we continue to cut back and forth between Michael and either his sister or his father, or eventually Connie shows up. And each time they cut back to Michael, his hair has grown more. And this is all being done practically. It is his real hair growth being scheduled into these shots.
Yeah. I don't know if I said this before, but it made me question exactly how they handled all this for the shooting schedule. Like maybe they filmed all the stuff where he had his, full head of natural hair at the beginning of the shooting schedule. And then towards the end of the shooting schedule, they either shaved him bald and then over the source of, waited a couple days, or they may have done it in reverse where they just buzzed him shorter and shorter as the days went on until like the last day of shooting, he was fully bald.
That would be my guess.
That, or, with the sheer amount of wigs he has to wear later on in the movie, like the huge long wigs he's got to wear, they may have buzzed his hair then just for the wig work. 'Cause that would have been easier. I don't know, whatever they did, it was a huge choice because they had to structure the shooting schedule around a child actor who can only work a certain number of hours a day. You can't work them all day like an adult actor.
Right. This choice is very cool just from wow, they practically figured out a way to do this. Like there's no, at this point in his hair's cycle, there's no, gags or anything that they had to craft. It's like, no, that's really his hair growing back or, being shaved down in some form. But this is another choice that I feel like adds to that nightmare feel or that dream feel where it's like, yeah, you'll just cut to a different part of your dream and something has changed with no normal visual provocation or sense of progress. Things are just different now.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, like this whole nightmare stuff that's going on with like the ghosts appearing in the kitchen and like raiding the pantry and stuff like that. All this is explicitly shot for horror. Like the lighting is horror. The music is horror. Tonally, this is all children's horror.
And it only gets more horrifying.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any argument that really, I don't see any strong argument that this is not a horror film for children because it really does capture that nightmarish feeling that is specifically trying to get at childhood fears. So you have this kid who's 11, who's on the, the verge of puberty, and suddenly he is growing ludicrous amounts of hair because of this peanut butter, solution given to him by a couple of ghosts of like the ugliest version of adulthood he can imagine. And then Connie realizes that the peanut butter solution works, and he's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put some down there. And Michael, of course, is like, what are you talking about? And Connie says, let a guy do what he's got to do.
When this happened, both the movie is going on and Michael's hair is just continues to grow longer and longer. We see a nice little gag where strands of hair growing out in front of his face while he's in school. And we were very much like, are they going to come back to Connie putting the peanut butter solution down there? Mm-hmm. And you were of the mindset like, I hope it gets dropped.
Yeah. Well, I was expecting that from this movie because it puts in so many weird details that it just forgets about. Like early on in the movie, there's a scene where Connie and Michael are walking down a sidewalk and there's ants, and then Connie has like a pet ant that dies, and there's like a bit of that in a scene, and it's like, why is this movie talking about this? This has nothing to do with anything.
And that's again what feeds into this whole like this is a good movie when people talk about like movies feeling like dreams, because it's like this has the logic of a dream. Sure.
It just goes anywhere and does anything it wants to do. So this hair growth obviously has now become this massive problem. It's interrupting his schooling. Now that he has hair, he wants to go to school. Like he keeps saying like, no, I want to go to school. I want my education.
Well, so the scene is that Connie has to sit behind Michael and continually cut his hair because it keeps growing. And like, that's the only way to stop it. And this has apparently become a distraction for some of the teachers who are threatening to resign because of it.
Yeah, this kid's hair is growing so much the teachers want to quit. That's a lot of hair.
This culminates in a scene in which Michael yells at a teacher like, no, I want to be educated. And the entire classroom claps. What?
Yeah, stand up for Michael, demanding his education.
Well,
it's very strange. I don't know any child who would do this, again, outside of a nightmare.
After this scene, Michael and Connie are sent to the headmistress's office. This is when they're informed that the teachers are going to resign, so he has to be suspended and sent home from school. They don't want him there. It is then that the headmistress says, Connie, I think you have a problem too.
We tilt down, and there are long, flowing black clumps of hair coming out of the bottom of Connie's pant legs. And it's like, okay, now Connie has grown like 3-foot pubes.
We can't not mention this. Like this movie painted us into this corner. Like there is a plot line in this movie with a kid growing super long pubes. Now, this is, I don't know if we're going to have to discuss this potentially. There was a scene also in which Connie is at home and his pubes are continuing to grow.
Yeah, and he's like, stop growing, pubes.
Yes, he yells at them to stop growing. And then after that, his voice deepens.
Does it?
Yes, you might have not gotten this in your cut.
Oh, no, I didn't get this on my cut. Interesting. Okay. So here's the point where we have to divulge that you and I watched 2 different cuts of this movie. There is a 93-minute theatrical cut that was released in its original Canada. And then there is a 90-minute television and home video cut that I saw. And the television and video, home video cut is the stuff that I saw as a kid. Like I remember renting this movie out of the public library as a kid. And this is what I saw, and it kind of matched up with my memory as best it could. I remember the movie very vaguely, but there are a couple of scenes that you got that I didn't.
And this was one of them. After he yells at his pubes to stop growing, that's a sentence that is now on the record that I've said. He speaks again, and his voice has deepened, like he's hit puberty. He's like, "What happened to my voice?" And then the next time you see him, that's been dropped completely. Like he's Understandably, yes. It's like, I don't.
But there's any number of details like that in this movie that they could have dropped because they're like total non sequitur, like don't have any sort of like implication on the rest of the movie. I mean, thematically, it's clearly making a statement. This is puberty anxiety, body horror, and it's unquestionably body horror.
And then and then the third act of the movie turns into something completely different.
Yeah.
In which the Signor has been let go from his teaching position because he's gotten a bunch of complaints about there's a kid that has said that he's having nightmares about the Signor at home because he's terrorizing him so much in class. In this scene, the headmistress divulges that the Signor is one seriously bizarre character.
Yeah, evidently she's done this extensive background check on him now, and it turns out he's tried to change his identity a whole bunch of times. Like he's like honestly, it's like what happens with abusive teachers or abusive clergy people. They just keep moving them around. Mm-hmm. And this is what has happened with this guy. So it's made very, very clear that this is not some cartoon villain. Like this guy's fucking bad. And one day while Michael is trying to get to school with his huge head of hair, the wind is blowing and he's like having to like take a rest. He like sits down and kind of falls asleep. And then here comes the Signor and Michael is abducted.
But so here's the thing. When this happens, all of a sudden in the time frame here is, again, this is more dream logic. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden we're seeing a classic, kind of newspaper montage saying like 20 kids reported missing. Somebody's kidnapping kids. I'm like, what? When did this happen? We just saw him take Michael with no provocation. We don't know why he kidnapped Michael. It just happens. And then all of a sudden it's saying like, oh, all of these kids are being kidnapped apparently by the Signor. What? Like
yeah. So very, very rapidly we learn it's like, okay, the Signor has abducted 20 local kids. We also learn that the Signor is now running a factory of some kind. He has this sort of industrial space, and he has a coat made of human hair. Yuck. And Michael is lying down in this, what honestly looks like a coffin, but it has this sort of trough that extends out that allows his hair to grow and grow and grow and grow. The reveal is that the Signor now has his own magical paintbrush factory made from Michael's magical peanut butter hair. And all the other kids are these laborers that are turning the hair into brushes and, putting it on brushes. And he's selling these at local art shops. So gosh, I forget how Connie and Susie get on the sort of detective thing where they go to a local art store and find one of these brushes. I forget how that links up.
I don't know how it links up, because at this point they're saying like, Michael's been kidnapped for this long, and I don't remember why they end up at the brush store, because, oh, no, they're not detectivizing at that point. They're going to get art supplies for Michael Hogan's character, Billy.
Oh, okay.
And that's when they come across a paintbrush and they're like, wow, this hair. And Susie says like, I know this hair. I've cut this hair. This is Michael's hair. And that's when they find out from the owner of the art supply store that the Signor has been making shipments every Friday. They see him make a shipment, and Connie hides in the back of his truck and leaves a hose dangling outside the doors of the truck and is pouring sugar while the Signor drives to give a trail that Susie can follow to find out where he goes. Then this becomes a music sequence with kind of the theme song of the movie, which was heard just the music in the opening credits. But then we get some singing. The singer seems very familiar, only to find out in the credits it's Celine fucking Dion.
Uh-huh. Yep, the premier vocalist of French Canada.
Like, Celine Dion is singing songs in a movie with magical child pube hair growth.
Yeah, and what's even stranger is the context in which this is playing. Like, it's a really upbeat song, and Susie is riding her bike chasing a child abductor while her friend is hidden in the back of the truck. Like, this should sound like an Angelo Badalamenti cue or something like that. This should sound like something out of fucking it really should sound like something out of a Lynch movie. It really is that strange.
But instead it's this peppy, like, your dreams are the best, or whatever, like, which just adds to all this weird tone. But this is when we discover the Signor's child labor factory, and apparently he makes them all dress in like pink karate gis.
Yeah, because, why not? It's another little choice. And his whole factory is kind of set up to mimic a spider web. Like, as he comes into the factory, there's like all these sort of webby textures on the walls, and then all the kids sleep in these hammocks. So everything is like web themed. And then there is a scene at night where I think Susie and Connie sneak in, or no, Connie has been abducted by the Signor now. He's found in the back of the truck after pouring all that sugar. And he's now part of the workforce making all these paintbrushes. And he's trying to snoop around one night while the Signor is sleeping. And the Signor has this ring on his finger that is has all these strings tied to it. And these strings are all tied to various things in the factory. It's like, oh, this is this guy's spider web. This is his security sort of system where, one of his little flies will touch one of the strings and he'll wake up. It's like, the sheer amount of weird detail that the movie keeps pouring on you at this point is difficult to process as an adult. As a kid, I don't know, it might just make more sense in the moment, but
well, I mean, it certainly has fairy tale resonance. Like, that's why I compare it to something like Roald Dahl, or even this whole factory section in the third act feels like a really dark Dr. Seuss idea.
Kind of. I mean, there are elements of like Genet or Guillermo del Toro, kind of that fairy tale whimsy that we get, that that's from filmmakers who aren't American. This movie never would have gotten made in the U.S. It's just so utterly strange, and you get the sense at this point, like, oh, this is sort of an unfucked with movie. It's very much not focus grouped, because it's so full of strangeness that there's no way that they like beat all the weirdness out of this movie to make it appealing. And
don't worry, it's still going to get stranger, because these paintbrushes that are made from Michael's ever-growing hair are apparently magical. And the Signor, when he wants to, because his whole thing was like, don't you just paint what's real. Don't paint with your imagination. But when he paints with his imagination, with these paintbrushes, he creates magical paintings that you can walk into.
Yeah.
The problem is that because they're imaginary places, if you walk into them, you can't come back out. Now that is never followed up on.
No, it's not followed up on, but also they say like it's a limited reality. Like, you know, the details in this scene that the painter doesn't know about, or that the paintbrush doesn't know about, don't get filled in. So it's not a complete reality. Kind of reminds me of Paper House a little bit, which I actually did as a shelf pick a few weeks back. But
yes,
at this point, Connie pulls some really weird shit and says, "Senor, adopt me as your son. I'm your son now."
Like, and this is all at first. Well, Connie goes on this whole thing about, like, you know, my dad died and I don't have a father and I always wanted you to be my father. I'm like, what? As many curveballs as this movie throws at you, I'm like, is this his backstory? Like, is this real? Of course, it turns out that no, he's just using it as a con to trick the Signor eventually. And the way that he tricks him is he wants him to paint the fright that Michael saw.
Yeah. Now, a scant few minutes before this, you sent me a message and you said, "We're never going to know what scared Michael, are we?"
That's true.
The movie seems so utterly disinterested in following up on that.
It seemed utterly disinterested on following up on anything. Like,
Connie's aunt is dead.
Yeah, like Connie's aunt is dead. Like, what is Michael Hogan going to sell the paintings? Like, what? Like, none of this seems to matter. Even the whole plot with the mom being away in Australia, like. Michael
are they going to get the rabbit along? Like, there's a scene where Susie and the dad go to the rabbit's art gallery, and we learn that the rabbit is the Signor's brother. And he's like, well, he makes deliveries here on every Saturday. And we just went through this shit with the fucking paint store, man.
So the Signor uses his magic paintbrush, and it literally looks like the opening of The Joy of Painting, where Bob Ross like paints himself out of existence or whatever.
That's true. But the Signor actually sort of comes alive. He's really happy now that he has a son. And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to put on a paint show for everybody." So he's dancing around with his paintbrush, you know, and all the kids are like, "Oh, yeah, very, very nice."
He's suddenly a total different. It's like he's not an asshole anymore. Like he's and the kids are all kind of like,
he comes off like a children's entertainer.
Yes. And so he's painting this magical painting of the burned down building, and everybody's like, "Yay." And then Connie's like, "Yeah, but you know, I wanted to see what the fright was." Like, and so the Signor walks into the painting, climbs up the kind of the rubble that leads up to the window. He gets inside, and you and I were like, he painted the fright. Like, what's the fright going to be? They actually came back around to this. We don't see the fright. He just gets scared and is launched out of the painting. And now he has been subjected to harem scarum and is now bald.
Yeah. He gets snatched. And this magically solves Michael's hair problem. It just does. Evidently the fright it's like It Follows. You know what I mean? You got to pass it on.
So I guess so. That's never, because this allows Connie to let the kids escape and to rescue Michael, who I guess has been being like sedated or something.
He's been lying in that, you know, at like the top of that production conveyor belt, I guess, in that coffin shaped thing. Keep in mind, Michael hasn't really been in the movie for like 20-25 minutes by the time they rescue him.
More than that, after he gets kidnapped, the last half hour of the movie, he's pretty much a non-presence until the very, very end.
He's got a couple of scenes where he's lying in the coffin shaped thing, and that's pretty much it. Like, he's not the protagonist of the film anymore. It's now up to Connie and Susie to save the day.
And so he's been, I guess, just laying there being like vibing. Because he's
just
like
growing his hair.
Yeah.
Not a cell phone in sight.
No, not a cell phone in sight. So Connie rescues him, but not before the Signor has a kind of fun jump scare moment where he opens a door in frame and now he's bald and he's got a mean face on. It's like, ooh, I'm going to get these kids. But then right at that second, Michael Hogan and I think the police show up and are able to kidnap the Signor. To arrest him, rather. He was the one doing the kidnapping.
We're kidnapping you and taking you to Canada jail.
Yeah. But so
I forgot how this movie ended. I knew that, you know, Connie was saved, but I couldn't remember what happened to the Signor, because it was just like, did he like run off into one of his own paintings and was never seen again? Did he like evaporate into like fart dust? You know, did a whole bunch of moths land on him and he disappeared? Like I really could not remember. It's just like any one of these possibilities could be true.
Well, that's because that's this movie. But the real, like the big climax then becomes Michael is going to walk into the Fright painting and be like, because he doesn't know what the Fright was. Like,
yeah, I don't know why he decides to walk into the painting. He could go to the burned out house again. There's no reason why he couldn't.
You're really going to ask that from this movie, like this movie of all movies, which has told us about Connie's dead aunt and like, and the whole giving him a magic pube growing storyline that apparently ended with him hitting puberty way too early. And then just that's wiped away. Like this movie, so he goes into the painting, and this was the whole like I'm like, okay, the Fright. What was the Fright? When he goes back into the old house again, the movie is doing all of its horror stuff very effectively for its intended audience.
Yeah, it's real atmospheric. It's creepy.
Yeah, there was an earlier scene where the two wino ghosts visit him in bed. And they are standing on either side of the bed, and the shot has kind of a little ways away from the foot of the bed, has these lights at the base of the two adult actors shooting up into them. I'm like, this is cool and stylish. And I just felt, I'm like, oh my God, this is a sleep paralysis nightmare.
What did they say to him in that scene? It's like, this is life, sweetheart. You don't get no second chance.
Well, yeah. Well, I think because we didn't even mention Travis. The first time he tried to make the peanut butter solution, Susie and his dad flushed it down the toilet.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And he, because they thought he was going to eat it. And Michael Hogan's like, you can't eat that stuff. It'll kill you. And he's like, I wasn't going to eat it. It's for my hair. And
which they thought was more acceptable, evidently.
For whatever reason. So now he can't remember the recipe. So the ghosts show up to him again, and the old lady ghost is dangling the recipe in front of him in his bed, and he can't move for some reason. Like, he can't reach up and grab it. I'm like, this is a sleep paralysis nightmare.
Yeah, I can't believe we forgot to mention that earlier, because it really is, like, crazy. I mean, and this movie will, like I said, it will take every chance to demonize the homeless it can. And it does this again in the end. You know, he goes into the painting to see what the Fright is. Turns out the Fright, wino ghosts.
It was just the old lady, and he's like, "Oh, it was just you. I don't know why I would have been scared of you."
Oh yeah, no reason to be scared of her.
Well, and well, because you know she's jumping around corners, going like 5 dead flies, and and all that.
Not scary at all.
No, I mean, all right, a deeper read of this incredibly academic piece of cinema. Is it possible he didn't see them as ghosts? He saw their burned corpses. Like,
that's a possibility. It's not outside the realm of this movie's like craziness.
Yes, or that he literally just saw the ghosts of the old wino. Because the male wino guy seems to be kind of more chill. Like, he's chill with Michael, and he's saying like, yeah, you know, there's no reason to be afraid of us. Like, you're learning, and he's the one. Because yeah, the old. The wino woman is dangling the recipe for the peanut butter solution in front of him while he's having this sleep paralysis moment. She's like, you know, that's life. You don't get any second chances. It's like, there is a good reason that a small group of people saw this as a kid, saw this as children, and it made a lasting impact on them, because this movie is unquestionably childhood horror, and it is unquestionably ridiculously bizarre.
Oh yeah, it's way out there.
Now it is worth saying though, as a movie, it's kind of okay.
Yeah, I mean, from all technical aspects, it's working as it should. Like, when it's trying for horror, it accomplishes it. It's the cinematography's fine, the lighting's fine. Like I said, the music's good. The Celine Dion songs are a little out of place, but you know, the end credits one feels certainly more appropriate. The acting is not atrocious on anybody's account. It's all functioning perfectly fine as a film.
I think it's if there wasn't all of this weirdness to the subject material and the many decisions that, stack up on top of each other. As far as execution wise, this reads like your kind of typical live action family film that you would see that went like direct to home video or something. It's got that vibe, and in that vibe, the majority of those movies are mediocre. And there is, if not for all of the weirdness inherent in the material of the peanut butter solution, the movie would probably just be that. Be like, yeah, probably be another movie. It's all these very strange decisions that make it so memorable. But as far as its execution of competency, I think it meets that same bar of quality as most of the other kind of family films of its ilk.
Sure. Yeah. And in the end, the mom comes home and everybody's happy.
Because that was a big deal. Like,
right. Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Honestly, Susie was doing just fine as the mom of the family.
So before we switch gears here, since this is a theme month, childhood nightmares, I think we talked a little bit about the nightmare of puberty, because Michael and Connie are almost at that age, it seems. At least that's the way that, because I believe I don't know if they ever mentioned specifically what grade they're in, but it's clear that they're probably just going to be on the cusp of really getting smacked in the face with puberty. Yeah.
I mean, the synopsis here says they're 11. So yeah, they're right on that verge.
Yes. So there is some element of childhood horror to that, but there's way bigger, weirder things, like the entire thing with the Senor. Like, you had even said, you were like, I had a teacher like this when I was in elementary school.
Yeah. Yeah. She was a real chode.
Yeah. And obviously, this being another, like, this is kind of a common theme in some kids' movies and stories where there's an authority figure who rails against imagination. Mm-hmm. And that this is clearly a movie that is like, oh, imagination is good. And it's like, yeah, wow, bold statement.
Well, it was particularly when it comes to like art, like to discourage imagination in art, like you have to reproduce this thing very specifically. Like that to me is a really insidious thing. Like I very much disagree with that philosophically.
Sure. But there's other nightmares that, like you're saying, like, I think this is instilling a fear of homeless people in kids. For
sure. I mean, I understand why a child might be afraid of a homeless person. As a child, they may not know any better, but like the extent that this film goes to demonize the homeless is so strange and frankly, ill-advised. Like, why would you do that?
Well, because I think the ending message is supposed to be, hey, I shouldn't have been scared of you. Like, he literally says that, like, there's no reason for me to have been scared of you. And it's like, I think it wants to come around to be like, hey, don't be, because earlier in the movie, Michael sees the male wino ghost and gives him some money, like, and is kind.
Sure.
And then the next day he burns up in a fire, the wino ghost. And so it's like even Michael's appraisal of them at first is like, no, I want to be kind to them. I feel bad. And it's like, okay, that's good. It's generous. And it's Michael's perspective is not demonizing the homeless until he has his hair frightened off by the ghosts of them. And the ghosts continue, at least particularly the old woman ghost, continues to torment him. And the actress is playing it as if she is kind of a little monstrous.
Yeah. I mean, she seems to be taking delight in tormenting this fucking kid after taking his hair away. Because
I'm not totally aware of this going into this theme month. But my predictions are like, when we do these theme months, like we do stuff like Scary Parents, which is an interesting kind of flip side to childhood nightmares, we ended up unknowingly with the stuff that we scheduled, finding out like, well, Scary Parents also ended up being about the fears of suburbia.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the horrors of suburbia. And childhood nightmares, my flip side would be like, well, I'm assuming that a lot of the horror is going to be about the adult world. And that's somewhat present here in the peanut butter solution.
Yeah, it's presented as something that's looming for these children, but it's handled from such strange angles, that it's pretty evident the film is not thematically trying to hammer one thing. It's all over the place with its themes, to the point where it's just like, I'm not sure what this movie was supposed to be about other than its premise.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got dashes of, okay, this is puberty body horror, fear of growing up, fear of the homeless, not understanding your parents, absent parents, and, strange teachers, it's the horror of being a child.
Which I think I'm hoping will also be reflected in a number of other movies we do for this month. But final feelings about the Peanut Butter Solution. It's like, I think it's an okay movie, but it's kind of a necessary recommendation to anybody who has an interest in very, very odd, off the wall type stories in movies, because it's just so singular.
It's true. I mean, I've never seen another movie like this. I mean, who knows, that series of Canadian films could have a whole bunch of shit like this, and this is the only one that got widely distributed enough on home video in the US to gain any kind of cult following.
Yeah, so when we come back for our episode on the dog who stopped the war, we'll let you know how it stacks up. But yeah, let's head over to the shelf, where we pick some movies that act as good pairings or substitutes for our main topic. And as always, we encourage you loyal listeners to go to genrevision.com, comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks, and we will feature them in next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for the Peanut Butter Solution?
This is a movie from 2015. It's by another Canadian filmmaker, Guy Maddin, who made My Winnipeg. He co-wrote and co-directed this with a guy named Evan Johnson. This is called The Forbidden Room. And if you want to really go down the rabbit hole of what it means to have like a dream-like experience in a film, like a phantasmagoric experience, The Forbidden Room is the movie I think that has captured it the best that I've ever seen. Going in blind on this, I wrote an article about this way back in the day, and I'll quote myself here. Going in blind is a recipe for complete bewilderment. It is this completely, like I said, phantasmagoric, like all of it is warping into one another. It's 17 different stories that are intercut. And when I say intercut, I don't mean like Cloud Atlas, where there's a jump cut and they come back and, stories and thematically appropriate moments. This is, just a total blast of nonsensical weird. It's funny in some aspects. Like I can remember, finding certain details of it pretty funny, but it's like a recreation of lost films from another dimension, or a recreation of lost films from somebody's dreams. Caroline Divernus from Hannibal is in it. Charlotte Rampling, Maria de Medeiros, and Udo Kier is in it. It's some of the stuff is like outright really strangely horrific, and then some of the stuff is really absurdist comedy, but it's just fucking weird. So if you want something that's really truly close to what a nightmare is like, where it's, it completely switches and changes and melts and warps, you got to watch The Forbidden Room.
Well, on my end, I am going with a film that I remember from my childhood that also has a confectionery themed title, although I don't think it thematically ties in at all with our episode this week. But when else am I going to be able to even reference this? This is called The Buttercream Gang. This is apparently, I think this is in the early 90s, and it was produced by a faith-based Christian production company. I can't really speak too much to the actual movie because I haven't seen it since I was a really young kid. And I remember watching it and being like, this sucks. Like, and understand, this is at an age where everything you watch as a kid is good. Like, so that has to speak to the film's quality on some level. As IMDb tells me, the premise is, unlike most gangs, the Buttercream Gang does good deeds. Their leader, Pete, has to go live with his aunt in Chicago, but things don't go well in Chicago, and Pete is changed when he returns. Soon, Pete is hanging around with the wrong crowd, but the remaining members of the gang, especially their new leader, Scott, refuse to give up on their friend Pete. I can't speak to the quality of this movie. I have a morbid curiosity towards revisiting it to see if it's actually inept and unaware of how bad it is. I don't know. If anybody out there besides me has ever heard or seen of the Buttercream Gang, please report back. I need to know this is not some like elaborate prank that's being pulled on me. that this is a film that exists.
I've heard of the Apple Dumpling Gang, but not the Buttercream.
Sure, yeah, the Buttercream Gang is the cheap, Walmart brand of the. So the Buttercream. That's all I got for this week, but we do have to do our listener shelf picks from last week's episode on Attack the Block and The World's End. Fergal Cole Reeves' picks were They Live and Candyman. Great flicks. Mr. Milksteak went with District 9 and James Gunn's Slither, which I'm sure our Genre Vision cohort Danny will appreciate. Hi, Danny.
Hello, Danny.
Eric Fuchs went with Doctor Who Series 11, Episode 1, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, which I believe is the first appearance of Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. JT went with Kingsman, The Secret Service, and Palefire went with The Breakfast Club, because apparently the character of Bender in that reminds him of Gary King. Great picks, everybody. That was a really fun episode. Also, go check out everybody's comments because people were chiming in on which movie they thought won the verses. And so there was some really good discussion that cropped up out of that. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Well, if you've listened to the show long enough, you probably know that I'm not like really big on comic books. There are certain comic book characters that I like, and like the only comic I ever really got into as far as collecting, not even print, not even collecting the actual comic books, but like buying the omnibuses was the Dark Horse Aliens comics. And that wasn't because I like comics. It's because I like aliens. Mm-hmm. However, after much, hearing a lot about it, particularly from you, I decided to start reading Alan Moore's run of Swamp Thing from the mid 80s. And I've been reading the Kindle versions of the Saga of the Swamp Thing books. And holy shit, this is good. I really, really like this. Yeah,
you've been sending, kind of updating me as you read it, where you're at, what arc you're on, sending me screenshots of certain pages. And it's kind of, every once in a while stirring my memories. Because I've only read through that run once. I have the first run of trade paperbacks that they made for it. Which I think it was about 6 trade paperbacks, and I remember loving it. I think it was one of the later Alan Moore comic things that I had read, and remembered really liking it and kind of thing. It's like, yeah, this is like it's not superhero-y in the way that I think you don't have the biggest interest towards. Like, it's not Swamp Thing, come help us, a meteor is coming.
Well, they kind of start off that way. It starts off in some familiar places with, there's like the first issue Alan Moore wrote was basically to tie up all the stuff that was previously going on in the comic. Mm-hmm. And so that first issue was like totally incomprehensible to me because it's talking about all these plot lines and all these characters that actually may not show up again. I don't know. And then once it starts off in earnest, it's kind of like a soft reboot where the big revelation is made that like, oh, Swamp Thing's origin is not what you thought it was. And it's kind of an important retcon that went on to define how the character would be handled up until New 52. Mm-hmm. And the revelation that like Swamp Thing is not his human self anymore in any capacity is defining what the character is now. He's now this sort of earth elemental god. And, the first big story is him versus Floronic Man. And it's a thing where it's like, oh, the Justice League monitors. It's like, oh, there's something going on down there. And Swamp Thing sort of saves the day like a superhero would. But after that, the stories get stranger and stranger and more cosmic. Turns out Swamp Thing is not a being in the traditional sense anymore. He is not a thing with a body. He is an elemental force that can occupy this magical plant space called the green that reaches all plant life. And that's where he really lives, and he can decide to grow and inhabit new bodies, and like all these new powers are rising up, and like he's awakening to godhood essentially. It's bizarre and fascinating and a great horror comic too. If you love monsters, this is it.
Yeah, I showed you. It's unfortunate that like pretty much all archived comic runs. These are all getting brand new digital re-inkings, and they're not bad. I'm not saying that they're all bad. There have been some bad ones.
The recolor on this is not like Killing Joke level where they've decided on a totally new color palette. This is trying to, as best it can, match the color palette at the original time of printing.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. And well, I find a lot of the time. But if you look at Swamp Thing comics today that were printed in the 80s, I mean, comics weren't printed on archival materials. This is not, low acid paper that was designed to not yellow and things like that. It's like, these are not archival inks. They're going to degrade. So trying to determine exactly what Swamp Thing looked like in the 80s is tough, but these digital recolorings look pretty good.
They are. I'm not saying they look bad. It's just the trade paperbacks that I have the original inkings, and because like you sent me a splash page and that was the first time you're like, this rules. Like this was like an image that immediately you're like, I am so on board with this. Like this was the perfect, because it was also, I think, the last page of that issue. Mm-hmm. And then I sent you the original inking. I was like, look at how different this is.
Yeah, but it wasn't a scan, taken, fresh off the presses on, in 1985 or 1984, whenever it was. So
sure,
it's degraded a little bit.
Yes. But that aside, it's like, just as a run, it's an incredibly influential run. It's wonderful to see a story like that. Swamp Thing as a character is probably just seen as like another superhero by people who don't know about it. It's like, actually, the way the character's been handled and his origins even are more based in horror and horror comics.
It's a horror book. Yeah.
Yes. And I think Moore's run and specifically the artwork that gets done by like John Totalbin and Steve Bissette is so cool and so different for comics, especially superhero, kind of the big two comics of the era.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had Bernie Wrightson as the sort of defining artist of Swamp Thing's original run.
Yes.
And Bernie Wrightson has a very definitive style where there's a lot of long sort of diagonal lines. And Bissette and Totleben try to ape that as much as they can initially. Like the first issue, because it's wrapping up prior plot lines, harkens back to more of the series' older art style. Mm-hmm. And then starting with the next issue that's kind of like that soft reboot, it's a whole new style. Swamp Thing gets a new design. He's way more detailed and more monstrous now. He cuts a stranger silhouette. There's a lot more sort of plant matter hanging off him. And Moore is content to inject the character with all these strange details. Like he grows flowers now. He grows these potato-like tubers out of his body that have hallucinogenic properties that allow people to connect with the green, and allows him to have a romantic relationship and all the things a romantic relationship should have. It's a really, really cool idea, or cool series of ideas. Really, it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it, man. It's a fun run, and I'm looking forward to when you reach the end of it, hearing your final thoughts. But
I have about 5 books to go.
Oh yeah, you've got a lot. Yeah.
And the Kindle books are 10 a pop.
Oh wow, okay. Well, we'll see. That might be an ongoing story with you.
That's all for me. What is on your plate this week, sir?
Well, I wrote a review of The Umbrella Academy Season 2. You can read it over at Giant Freaking Robot. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. I did not watch Umbrella Academy Season 1. I was assigned this to review. So I watched a recap video and read some synopses and stuff. And I read the first trade paperback of the comic book, The Umbrella Academy, when it came out. It's sort of an X-Men riff, like an academy of superheroes that eventually kind of go their separate ways and then are reunited for the funeral of their father figure who had adopted or purchased or kidnapped them when they were all kids, because they were all born on like the same night. And on that same night, this is when these superpowered beings were all born. And they're going to try and stop some sort of apocalypse deal. The second season kicks off with them stopping the particular apocalypse that was going to happen in season 1, but getting knocked back in time to the early 60s. And now they have apparently brought the apocalypse with them, and it's taken a new form in the form of nuclear holocaust, brought on by tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. And this second season, rather, having not seen the first season, I felt pretty comfortable, like, with what was going on. And it's clear that there seems to be a common issue with the first season, people saying that it was way too kind of dour and po-faced and the mood was all wrong for the tone of the characters.
I don't know. I watched the first episode of that first season and I was like, this is silly, but it's not my kind of silly. Like, it's okay that it's silly. It just wasn't for me.
Okay. Because this season, it's definitely felt like, okay, the characters are true to themselves and their tone, but this doesn't seem like oppressively trying to be serious or dour. But that doesn't mean it's doesn't have stuff on its mind. Being in the early 60s, it's set in Dallas, and eventually it's coming up to 1963, 10 days before Kennedy is going to be assassinated. Mm-hmm. And one of the characters is trying to stop the assassination. Some of the others are, saying you can't do that because that's going to change timeline, that kind of bullshit. And one of the other characters, because the characters get stuck at different points in time in the early 60s, and they think, well, I'm stuck here for good. There's no way going back. I got to live in this era now. One of them, I believe her name is Allison. She's a black woman, and she is married to her husband, who is a civil rights protester of sorts. And like these first couple episodes, they're talking about they're going to plan this big sit-in for when Kennedy's going to be in town, so they can get the news cameras on them. And it's like, okay, like it's got some stuff on its mind, and it's being very pointed about it. It's got a good cast. Like Ellen Page is one of the family members, the superpowered family members. For not having watched the first season, I had to watch a couple episodes, and then I wasn't able to watch the following episode, and it was like, oh, I wanted to watch the next one. I was like, oh man, like I can't watch the next one. I was like, well, that's a good sign. Like I was vibing with it.
Good.
Very good. From what I looked as far as kind of critical and audience reception to the first season, it would seem like if you liked the first season but were a little uneasy or thought there were some things that needed to be tweaked, this second season seems to have achieved that really well. I can recommend it. And that's pretty much going to be everything on my plate, so we can close things out with our
Comment of the Week.
And it's an appropriate comment of the week because it's actually going to focus on the movie we're doing next week. This is from loyal listener Hob, and Hob is talking about The Brave Little Toaster. And he says, Toaster is one of those things where if you're familiar with the author at all, it's kind of amazing that anyone let him anywhere near entertainment for children. Not because he was personally creepy or anything like that, but because his adult science fiction novels, which Hob highly recommends, are so intensely bleak that they make the existential dread of Brave Little Toaster look like the Care Bears. This author, whose name is Thomas M. Dish, had a brief success in mass market horror with The MD, but that one was a little too weird and complicated to attract Hollywood attention. I didn't know about the author behind this, and apparently Hob goes on to elaborate that this was not published as children's material. It was published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and he was apparently a highly respected enough science fiction writer that this magazine would print anything he wanted to do, and he wanted to do a fairy tale about anthropomorphized home appliances. This is fascinating to me as I find The Brave Little Toaster and its origins and production part of what makes it so fascinating, and I'm sure we'll touch on that somewhat in next week's episode. But I had no idea about this. This is awesome. Hob says maybe I should have saved these comments for the actual episode about the movie. No, actually, thank you so much, Hob, for letting us know that going into the movie.
Yeah.
That's really cool trivia and will help inform our read on the movie. So thank you. I'm so grateful that we have the listeners that we do and that are continuing to be part of this process of us educating ourselves about the movies we do and adding more context. It's great. So thank you so much, Hob, for that. And we hope you all will be back next week as we continue Childhood Nightmares Month with certainly a personal childhood nightmare film of mine, The Brave Little Toaster. One that I'm very much looking forward to and have extolled the virtues of before, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. But this, Travis, I know you'd seen this as a kid, but this is pretty much going to be like a first watch for you, right?
I'd seen it a few times as a kid. Like, I have vague memories of what happens in the film. So, I mean,
okay,
it'll be my first watch with adult eyes, which I'm sure will be very different.
Oh, of course. So we hope you'll all be back next week as we continue down the path of childhood nightmares. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.